Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another 2021 Overwatch League roster breakdown, analysis, review video. Today, we are taking a look at the London Spitfire, an interesting team in 2020, all Korean roster, move over to Korea when COVID broke. They're having a little bit of success. They're kind of hitting their stride in North America right before COVID hit, but when they were in APAC, they struggled a lot, finishing the season with a record of 6-15 minus 24. But I think they were better than what their record had said. Just Asia was a very good region, and they struggled a lot. This season, their team is very, very different. They have gone with a major overhaul of their roster, moving away from a Korean roster, moving into a European roster, primarily European roster. So let's take a look at this team and talk about what they have, and look at the players that they have. I am tired. So starting with the tanks, the two tanks for this team are Hadi and Molfig, both formerly of British Hurricane. You are going to notice a trend, but these two come from British Hurricane. Of course, if you know anything about British Hurricane dominated the EU contender scene for the better part of a year, from May of 2020 really until, actually before that. They started really dominating a while ago, starting back in 2019. They found a ton of success, but really doing a lot this season and winning a bunch of the major weekly tournaments. So they won pretty much every game they played in contenders for a very long time. They got first at every major level of contenders in 2020. They won the EU Gauntlet. They won in July. They won in August. They won in September. They won in October. I think the only one they lost was in November, where they lost to Obey Alliance, who is a team that has had a number of players promoted to the Overwatch League. This is a very dominant team in Europe for the past year or so, so a lot of these players getting moved up. And Hadi and Molfig were two of the most important pieces of that because they were the tank line for that British Hurricane roster. And both of them can play basically everything you need them to play from your off tanks. You know, Hadi doesn't have a bad main tank. He can play them all. He doesn't necessarily have the best in the league for all of them, but he is very good at all of them, and he can do what he needs to do. He can compete at a high level. He is going to be somebody very good, and he's going to bring a ton of consistent play in that main tank role. If he's going to be as good as your Fearlesses, your Monos, your Smurfs, it's a little too early to tell, but he is a very good main tank player, has been doing very well in contenders the past year, so he is a very big addition to the team. You put him alongside Molfig, who he has been playing with the entirety of 2020 in contenders, playing alongside somebody for that long. You obviously build a lot of synergy. He was with British Hurricane from July of 2019 up until he joined the London Spitfire. You look at Hadi. He joined them back in July of 2019 as well. So they've been playing with each other the entire time they were at British Hurricane, basically. So a lot of time played with these two. A very synergized tank line already. Molfig is going to bring out your D.Va. He's going to bring out your Sigma. I don't know how good his Hog is, and I don't know how good his Zarya is. But I think that for the most part, I'd expect to see a lot of D.Va and Sigma and Zarya. I don't expect to see a lot of Hog. So I feel confident with where his D.Va and his Sigma are at. I have not seen any of his Zarya personally. So I don't know how good it is. But this is an interesting tank line. I think this is a solid tank line. Two players who have been doing really well in contenders. We've seen a lot of teams struggle when they have Western tanks, especially Western main tanks. They have been one of the roles where I think historically has really shifted away from European and Western talent. You know, you think back to season one, you had the likes of Fraggy, who had a very good season, but by the time Sato came in, Fraggy never saw playtime. You know, the Gladiators had iRemix. They bring in Fissure, the team changes immensely. Obviously, Fissure was a huge talent and a much bigger piece than what iRemix was, but it's something that we see kind of in different points throughout the Overwatch League. But over time, the Korean main tanks have really kind of started to cement themselves as kind of upper level. With the exception of Super, there really aren't any Western main tanks that I think have really kind of risen to be the best in the league. So it's a lot for Hadi and Molfig to reach some of those highs and be able to compete at such a high level, but I think it is something they can do. I think they have what it takes to be that good. And like I said, they have that synergy, which is a huge thing that not a lot of teams have when they bring in players from contenders. There's always a risk when you bring in players from contenders, when you take one of two routes, right? One of the routes you can take is maybe not going for the best talent necessarily, but going for the best team. So you go for the synergy that already exists. So maybe you don't have as high of a ceiling with your team, but it's a bunch of players who've played together. They know what the other players do, so they don't have to kind of build that synergy as much because it's already there. The other option is the scouting process, where you bring in players you think are very good, you build a team of a bunch of talented players, and then you build the synergy over time. And in theory, over time, that team would become better than a team that maybe isn't the best players, but is a very good team that knows how they play well together already. So for the most part, this London Spitfire team has gone for the latter of bringing in the former of bringing in a team that has already played together for the most part. And you have Hadi and Molfig, who have played together in the past, who know what each other does, and so it will be a very interesting thing to see how those two play with that synergy they've already developed. And it'll be interesting to see if they are able to stand up against some of these really good tank lines we're seeing in North America. The likes of the San Francisco Shock, Washington Justice, the Dallas Fuel, Florida Mayhem. There's some very strong tank lines in North America this season, so I'm interested to see how they do. But moving on to the support line, we have two Overwatch League veterans, though one a little less known for his time in the Overwatch League. We start with Kelix, the main support player. Kelix is an interesting player. I was never the biggest fan of Kelix during his time with the Boston Uprising and the Toronto Defiant. I always thought he was a pretty middling, average to below average main support. I never thought he was incredible. One of the things that did very much impress me was his performance in the Overwatch World Cup back in 2019 when he was playing with Team Denmark, where Team Denmark made a very good run. They finished top 6. They lost to South Korea, but they made it into the top 6, which was very impressive for the time, and something that I think was really important for that team was how they managed in that World Cup. And I think it's also interesting. This is something I want to note. There's actually a lot of players from that 2019 Denmark team in this London Spitfire roster. You have Molfig, he's a Danish player, and also Shax, who is on this roster, is also from Denmark. So you have 3 players who were on that World Cup team. So you have some synergy there, even if they didn't play with British Hurricane, which Kelix did and Molfig did, but Shax did not. You have some synergy there, which is something incredibly useful and incredibly helpful when you consider how good that run was the World Cup. That was a very good run, and I'll get even more into that when I start talking about some of the coaching staff here in a little bit. But like I said, Kelix comes into this team after retiring from the Overwatch League, leaving the Toronto Defiant, comes back to join the British Hurricane, and is now back playing with the London Spitfire. It's hard for me to break some of my feelings about Kelix's performances with Boston and Toronto. I was never impressed, to put it lightly, with Kelix. I never thought he was an incredible player. I thought he was fine. I thought he was okay. But I think he'll be better in a better team environment. I thought Boston, especially in 2019, was a horrible team environment. And there was a lot of drama from everything we've heard. 2020 with Toronto and COVID, it's so difficult to kind of judge a player based on, a ton of things that happen to kind of throw you off. So seeing Kelix, the way he performed in the 2019 World Cup gave me some renewed hope. And I think the fact that he was on a very good British Hurricane team for a lot of 2020 really makes me feel confident in Kelix as a player moving now into the Overwatch League again on a team that I think will work better for him. And his support buddy is Ripa, a Finnish flex support player. Had a brief stint with the LA Gladiators during the 2019 season. I don't believe he saw any playtime that season. Maybe a little bit, but he did not play a lot. For the most part, he was on the bench for the LA Gladiators, but he was with the British Hurricane from December of 2019 until January of 2021. So over a year with the British Hurricane, and he was a very consistent top-level player. He was one of the best players on the team, arguably. I remember watching Contenders back in, I think, late 2019, maybe the beginning of 2020, but I think it was late 2019 when he had kind of just rejoined. It was probably early 2020, honestly, because that makes more sense. But I do remember going back and watching some British Hurricane play, and I remember they were talking about Ripa a lot. They were showing how good he was. They were talking about his success and a lot of what he was able to do for the British Hurricane. So it is a very good sign that somebody has had that much success in Contenders, and he's now coming up, getting promoted, and playing for this London Spitfire team. So this is an interesting support line. I think that the two of them definitely will work well together because they have some experience playing with each other. They've both been at the Overwatch League level before, so they have seen the way it works at that higher level. Even if Ripa didn't play a lot, he still was there, which I think is important enough. Just being there is definitely something you have to point to and look at and consider when you talk about how good a player is. He has that experience. He's been in an Overwatch League system, so he knows what he's doing. And you also get some more practical experience with other coaches and other players, so you can learn from the best of the best more when you're actually in the Overwatch League. So with no more Big Goose and Shaz, there needs to be some Finnish representation, so it's nice seeing Ripa back in that position. So that is definitely something I am looking forward to, how he performs on this team. Finally, let's move to the DPS lineup, where I think the most potential is on this roster. I want to start with the Flex supports, or Flex DPS, which is kind of funny because there's really like one, like your dedicated Flex projectile DPS player for this team is Blase. Of course, formerly for the Houston Outlaws last season, played at the Boston Uprising in 2019. Blase is the first player that they actually signed to this new London Spitfire roster. And he's going to play your Doomfist, your Pharah, your Genji, your Hanzo most likely. That is what Blase plays. That is what he is most known for. If you have to have a projectile player in, most likely it's going to be Blase. When you kind of go beyond that and you want to look at your more like Echo type of flex role, your Tracer type of flex role, that's when you start going into your other players on this team. But Blase is your dedicated projectile, flex DPS player. Obviously, Doomfist doesn't really like projectile, but the same type of category where he's not going to be your hit scan specialist. We saw Blase play hit scan last season. At times, it was not very good. But there is no reason why Blase should ever have to play Hitscan on this team, because this team is loaded with Hitscan talent. As I mentioned before, they have Shax, formerly of the LA Valiant. Once again, another Danish player on this team. I think Shax is an incredible player. His Tracer is amazing. And he is somebody who I think brings a lot to this team. There are other good players on this team who play Tracer, who can play Sombra. But I think that Shax's Tracer is the best in this team. He has one of the best Western Tracers and one of the best Tracers, period. You know, between him and Dante, you kind of have to determine who's your best Western Tracer, but Shax is an incredible player, and I think that he brings a lot to this team. Even if he's a very, kind of specialist type of player where you pretty much only run him on Tracer, it's interesting when you look at that, because that is something we actually saw with British Hurricane in the past. You look at British Hurricane back in the days when they had Suna on the roster, they would have him just be a Tracer specialist when they needed him. And I think that Shax might have that role, which is not all that bad when you consider the fact that Tracer is a very, very prominent hero. You see a lot of Tracer in the Overwatch League. We've always seen Tracer pretty prominently, so I think Shax will have a big impact on this team. His Sombra is pretty good as well. I think his Tracer really is, of course, his main claim to fame and the main reason why people know him and know how good he is. But he does also play Sombra. He also has some other things he can pull out, some other hits. Like he can play your sniper hit scans, like your Widows and your McCrees. And he plays Reaper as well. We've seen him play Reaper at a pretty high level. He also runs the Hanzo. So there's some overlap between he and Blase. So might see a little bit of him here and there, but in kind of that Hanzo role. I don't really know which one of them they'd run. Probably Shax, honestly, because I do think Shax is that good of a player. For the majority of the first half of the season or so, we can expect to see Hybrid as the main sniper for this team. He is their Widow, he is their Ashe, and that is what I expect the role for Hybrid to be. I think by the end of the season, we're going to be seeing mostly Sparkar, who is currently 17, and he turns 18 June 10th, so they should have him for the June Joust, I think. If not, they should have him for the Summer Showdown and Countdown Cup going into, of course, the end of the season. But I think they should maybe have him for the June Joust, because that is early June that is going on, or that he turns 18. So maybe it's the type of thing where it's like if they make a deep enough run, they'll have him available. I don't really know, but he might not even play in the June Joust anyway, just because of the timing of it all. But he should be eligible. He is not. So he'll be able to play in the second half of the season when he turns 18 on June 10th. So he is the player to look out for. The only way he actually plays in that is if the team gets to the point where they travel to Hawaii. That would be the only way you'd see him. But I would think that's very unlikely. So there's a chance he plays in the June Joust, but most likely his debut will be in the lead up to the Summer Showdown. He is the player to look out for. When he is eligible to play, he is going to bring a lot of change to this team. He has been dominating in Contenders Europe. He has been the best player on this team, I think, of everybody that was on British Hurricane. And he is the piece to look out for. He is the player I am looking at as the star when he is of age, because he is going to have that Sparkle-like effect. Maybe not at the same level where Sparkle was, incredible and the best Genji in the league, and basically single-handedly won the Paris Eternal, the Summer Showdown. But I do think Sparkar is that type of player where he's so good and he'll bring so much electricity to this London Spitfire roster that can kind of reinvigorate them going into the second half of the season. So there's a ton of potential and talent on this team. They only brought up one of British Hurricane's DPS players. The other one that used to be on the team, who is no longer on the team, is Doned. They did not bring him up, instead opting to go into Overwatch League veterans, grabbing Blase and then eventually Shax. Hybrid coming over, mainly because I think they needed a hit scan player while Sparker wouldn't be around and wouldn't be able to play. So it is an interesting team. I think they have 4 DPS players, but the main reason is that you needed to have somebody fill in for Sparker before he's of age. So that is what I am looking at with this team. This is an interesting team to me. I think a lot of people are I see a lot of people making power rankings and putting the London Spitfire pretty low in North America, usually bottom 4, bottom 3, with the likes of the Paris Eternal and the Vancouver Titans, mainly, because those are the rosters that are predominantly Western, if not entirely Western, in the case of the London Spitfire and the Paris Eternal. I think this is an interesting team. You know, the coaching staff they've put together is interesting. You have Fisher, not Fissure, the main tank player, but Fisher, the former DPS player, who is a Danish player, or was a Danish player, so obviously someone who has coached Kelix, or played with Kelix, Molfig, and Shax in the past. Now he's coaching them. You have Commander X and Reprise as well in this coaching staff. So it is a pretty big group of coaches that have had a lot of success in the past at various levels in their careers. And so I think this is an interesting team because I don't think they're going to be a bad team. But the thing you have to realize is these are players who spent all of 2020 just dominating EU contenders. And now they're going into the Overwatch League, right? And the reality is, of the main 4 regions of contenders, which are Korea, China, NA, and EU, EU is arguably the weakest. Now, my point to everybody who sits here and says, well, NA contenders is garbage. Most of the players in NA contenders aren't actually from North America. It's some of the best players from Europe and some players that come over from Asia, specifically Korea usually, that play together and kind of come into these teams because of the money that NA has and a lot of questions. So, or question, I don't know. Anyway. So EU is arguably the weakest of the 4 regions. So dominating a Contenders Europe is good, and it's impressive, and it shows that you deserve to be at the Overwatch League level. But a lot of these players, you know, these rookie players, your Hotties, your Molfigs, your Sparkers, your Hybrids, these are players who have never really experienced play at the highest level, playing against the best talent in the world. So it's really difficult for me to look at this team and immediately think this is going to be a team that's going to compete at the highest level. They're not going to be a bad team, and I think you put this London Spitfire roster against some teams from, you go back to like 2018, 2019 Overwatch League, this London Spitfire roster would probably dominate some of those teams. Like, obviously, like they would be better, I think, than the Boston from 2018, which were a top 3 team. They dominate that team. I think they would dominate a bunch of teams from kind of the past. But with the way that the Overwatch League has evolved, the talent gets better every single season. And so I do have a lot of questions about this London Spitfire roster as it comes to them playing against some of the best teams in the league. I think the addition of Shax will help them a lot to kind of be more consistent and hit some of those peaks and heights and highs that they had kind of struggled with, or that I think they would have struggled with without Shax. I think he adds that kind of next level of dynamic play. He is such an explosive player and has the potential to really just change games. I look at this Spitfire roster very similarly to how I look at the Valiant from 2020, where it really just came down to let Shax and let KSP just pop off, just give them the resources to just make plays and just dominate games, and we just have to make sure that our tanks and our supports stay alive, right? Keep those 2 alive, and we clean up, right? or you know, we do as much as we can to just make sure that we're alive so they can put in the work they need to put in. That's what I look at. When Sparkar is of age, that is the way this Spitfire roster is going to perform at the highest level, and the way that they are going to compete is just by saying, Shax, Sparkar, do your thing, make plays, win us games. So that's where I am for this team. I did not expect to talk for 25 minutes about the Spitfire. I really am interested in these players. I'm not super familiar with a lot of these players. I've seen bits of them here and there, and I've seen them play at various different points throughout their careers, but I did not watch Contenders super closely in 2020. So I'm very excited and interested to see how this team performs, especially with the kind of injection of some of these Overwatch League players as well. It'll be very interesting to see what this team does. But those are my thoughts on this London Spitfire roster. Let me know your thoughts on this team in the comments down below. But that is all from me for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, want more videos like this in the future, consider liking and subscribing. I'll be doing these for all the teams in the league, so if you want to check those out, the playlist will be linked at the end of the video. You can check those out. But that's all. Thank you once again. I hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.